Hi there, it's Wendy Hernandez with Command the Courtroom, and I have been looking for these guests for so long, and I'm really excited to host today Nell Bowers and Dr. Shannon Wilson. Nell is a licensed psychologist, and Dr. Shannon Wilson is a licensed clinical psychologist. Together, and their mother and daughter, by the way, so I love that. Together, they've worked with children, families, and courts and child protective services for more than 55 years. They believe visits between non custodial parents and their children, which need to be supervised and documented by a trained and neutral party, should take place in a natural environment. This allows for healthy interaction between parent and child while still providing sufficient structure and control. To this end, they created the Assurance Group. Welcome, Shannon and Nell. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Our pleasure.
Oh, thank you. So, I've never been able to find somebody who's willing to come on the show and talk with me about these different things. So I'm so excited. And I will tell anybody who's watching this video that like 2 minutes before we started recording this session, I learned something new about supervised visits and therapeutic supervision. And I've been practicing law for 25 years, family law almost. So, Shannon and Nell, can you talk to me about the difference between supervised visits and therapeutic supervision? Because I really wasn't aware of the distinction before a couple minutes ago.
It all has to do with the role of the supervisor and the goal of the visit. In supervised visitation, the supervisor observes and records what happens during the visit, and they only intervene if it is necessary to uphold the policies and procedures of the organization or the orders of the court or for the safety and well-being of the child. They're more a non-participating observer. At the end, of course, they would write a report and that would go wherever it needed to be sent, attorneys, judges, whatever. In a therapeutic supervision, it is more interactive. It's more family therapy where it is in the setting of a visit. And the supervisor is also the therapist. So there would be the parent, the child, and the supervising therapist involved. And that's more of an educational, interactive process where communication is facilitated and clarified as necessary.
One of the big things, at least with our group, is that during a supervised visit, there's no discussion allowed of what has happened in the history of the case, how we got to where we are, that sort of thing. And there's no discussion allowed about what's going to happen in the future. But those discussions are encouraged in the context of a therapeutic visit. So it's more of an opportunity for the parent and the child to work through the things that went wrong in the relationship while still working on rebuilding the positive stuff.
Okay, so thank you for that explanation. And I have several questions. One of the questions that I have is, at least in my world, a court orders supervised visits when the court feels that a child might be in danger for some reason. Maybe there was past domestic violence or there's a drug history, by the parent who's having parenting time with the child. Is that your experience as well, or are there other reasons why supervised visits might be ordered in your world?
That's been mostly our experience. Sometimes, there's an actual history, sometimes from one parent about the other, and it's kind of a safety measure. But yeah, those are primarily the reasons that it gets ordered.
Okay, so when you compare that to therapeutic supervision, would a reason in your world that a judge orders therapeutic supervision also be potentially because there was, domestic violence or some sort of drug abuse, or could a judge order therapeutic supervision for different reasons?
Yeah, I think a lot of times when I see the therapeutic visit ordered, it's because there's been a problem specifically between the parent and the child. Sometimes with supervised visits, the problems were between the parents and didn't necessarily involve the children. So there may be concern about the child's safety with the non-custodial parent, because of the interactions between the parents, but not necessarily between the non-custodial and the child. With the therapeutic visit, either the child has seen domestic violence between the parents, or there have been issues between the non-custodial parent and the child specifically that need to be worked through and addressed.
More of a parenting issue requires supervisory visitation or therapeutic visitation. If the parent just has been inappropriate and doesn't know how to interact with the child, then that would be more appropriate to have a therapeutic visitation, because it's communicating better ways to interact with the child.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you another question, which may lead us into another area that we're going to touch on in a bit. And I think this is going to be maybe a 2 or 3 part series of videos. But I think all of these concepts are related, and I just want you to help me understand the distinctions and help the viewers, of course. Say, for example, we have a teenager who's 15 or 16 years old, and the teenager is rebellious, not getting along with one of the parents, let's say dad. And, part of it's maybe just the nature of the teenager being a teenager. They're searching for more independence. But then also, parties are going through this separation or relationship transition. And so it's caused a break in the relationship between the teenager and one of the parents, not necessarily a primary custodial parent. The parents might have equal time. In a circumstance like that, generally, is a therapeutic supervision what a parent should be looking at, or should it be something different? Does that make sense? It was kind of never be allowed in a courtroom, but
it does. That does make sense. And I actually have a case like that right now where the parents share 50-50 custody, but the 15-year-old girl is really struggling with her relationship with her dad. And a therapeutic visit necessarily wouldn't be what we would call that, just because typically a therapeutic visit is the only time that parent has contact with the child. So that would be more of just a straight kind of family therapy involving the father and the teenager at that point.
Okay. I want to ask you to help me paint a picture of what a supervised visit just kind of looks like. Like if I was a fly on the wall, what would that look like versus therapeutic supervision? Meaning, where are people sitting? Like how close is the person who's the facilitator or the observer? Can you describe some of that just for somebody who might be facing supervised visits or therapeutic supervisions? They can know what to expect.
We believe that the best location for a supervised visit is in a natural setting that makes everybody more relaxed. Pre-COVID, we were able to supervise visits at zoos, at parks, at museums, all kinds of fun places, as long as the supervisor is able to see and hear everything that goes on during the visit. So if they're at a restaurant, the supervisor is sitting right there at the table in the booth with the parent and child, not necessarily participating in their interaction, but being that fly on the wall and paying attention to what is going on, anticipating where the conversation might go in an inappropriate direction. I had a client one time say, well, so if we're at a fast food place, where would they sit at the next table? I said, no, they're going to be right there in the booth, right beside you.
To an outside observer, they would look like a little family of 3. Just the one adult isn't talking very much.
The child gets to pick where they want to sit. If they would prefer to sit by the supervisor for whatever really reasons for safety, that's my therapeutic cat, sorry. And they might prefer to sit by the parent, and that's the child's choice.
All right. So thank you for that. So how is therapeutic supervision? How does that look different if I'm looking down from above?
So the therapeutic visits are very different, at least the way we do them. And this is one of those things that each practitioner kind of puts their own spin on a little bit. So it's likely to look different from one place to another. But the way that we do it, when I have a therapeutic visit, I will have the parent that's involved in the therapeutic visit come in and sit down in my office first, and then I'll go back out and get the kiddo and bring them in. And that way the child kind of gets to choose how they say hello to the parent, and they can go sit with them or they can sit on the other couch. They get to sort of choose what feels safe and good for them. And then we usually start the session with just kind of an update about what's been going on in each of their lives since they saw each other last. And then I will usually ask if there's anything that the child wants to talk about first, and let them kind of take the lead if they have things that they want to address. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I will have met with the child by themselves before this to kind of go over what they do want to talk about. Sometimes they're comfortable bringing it up and sometimes they're not. So if they're not, then I will kind of ask questions to get us talking about what needs to be discussed. But
Okay.
at that point, I'm an active participant in guiding the conversation.
Thank you. So, to what extent is the parent who's not having the therapeutic supervision, to what extent are they involved? Like, do you get feedback from them? Do you talk to them, or are they just out of it?
Yeah, it's really important with both supervised and therapeutic visits that there is a balanced picture of what's going on. It's also really important to stay neutral and to stay solidly on the side of the child. You know, our goal in all of this is a happy, healthy, well-adjusted child. And anything that would artificially shift us toward one parent or another is really important to keep out of the arena. But typically when we do supervised visits, we meet with each parent separately and go over with them the structure and the policies and the procedures and talk to them about how they can make this a successful experience for their child. With the therapeutic visits, we do the same thing, but the child is also involved in a meeting with the provider to get all three perspectives.
So, speaking of the ideas that you share for prior to supervised visits about how a parent can make it a successful experience for the child, can you share some of those tips with anybody who might be watching this? Because I think these are important things for people to know that they don't know.
The most important thing in any separation or divorce is that the parents not badmouth each other, that as they're preparing, and we have a handout that we give to people to help them understand how they can set things up for a more successful visit. And the most important part of it is be positive, reinforce that this other parent wants to see them and loves them, and that it's going to be okay, that the supervisor will be there if they have any questions. And that really is the primary thing that needs to happen. The parent who is supervised needs to understand the limits and the things that they can and cannot talk about, the ways they can and cannot ask questions, so that they are more open and less threatening to the child. So much of it depends on the history between the child and that parent, and whatever beliefs the child may be holding about the parent.
I was just going to say, too, I mean, a lot of times when people are ordered to have supervised visits, that feels hugely offensive to them, which we completely understand. Kind of the sneaky side benefit of supervised visits is that now there is a completely neutral, educated, impartial, compassionate third party who can watch the interactions between that parent and their child and really tell the truth about what's going on. There have been so many times that we have heard, you know, well, parents used to fight all the time and the child is terrified of the father. And then we get them in a supervised visit setting and the kid runs to the father and leaps into his arms and climbs on him like a jungle gym. And, you know, obviously that child is not terrified of their parent. But this is an opportunity for them to, first of all, interact with their child without any possibility of false allegations being made. And also a possibility for them to interact with their child and have someone witness and report on that in a way that is not spun in any direction other than the truth.
Those are great side benefits. I think the parent who is not the one being supervised, at least this is what I hear often, they would say, well, of course, my ex is going to behave because they're under a microscope right now. Of course, they're not going to badmouth me. Of course, of course, of course. So, what are your thoughts on that objection that I hear often?
Yes. So you'd actually be surprised how many people don't behave when they're under a microscope.
Oh, really?
It's really, it's really kind of unsettling. You can tell pretty quickly which parents are only holding it together because they are being supervised and which parents are just really legitimately together. The other thing that I always encourage in situations like that is that the kiddo be involved in individual therapy for themselves. Because that way, if the supervised visits go great and then they move to unsupervised visits and the child is uncomfortable, they have a way to let somebody know about that. They have an outlet, a voice, for them that can help sort of ameliorate some of that if it starts to happen.
Okay.
It's very important that neither parent be involved in those therapy sessions of the child.
And that the therapist talk to both parents.
Yes. Okay. So, Nell, can you tell me why it's important from your perspective that parents not be involved with that?
Because a child is going to feel loyal to whichever parent they're with. And one of the biggest lessons that we try to help parents teach their child is that they can love both parents without being disloyal to anybody.
Great.
That I want you to love the other parent. They love you and they're important. You're important to them. And I want you to love them. I want you to have fun. And if a child feels they have to choose, then that's horrible for the child to be in that position. But it also is going to color what they say in a therapeutic session or what they don't say.
Got it. Okay.
And even who brings the child to the session is important. So if I'm ever treating a child that's in a divorce situation, I will meet with each parent separately before I meet with the child, and then I'll meet with the child, and then I alternate which parent brings the child to the appointment. Because that lets me stay involved with both parents about how the kiddo is doing at their house, what concerns they have, and it also lets me see how the child is with each parent.
And so is it common for you to see differences in behavior based on the parent?
Yes.
Yes, very much so.
I had a little girl I worked with once. She was about 6, and her dad worked out of town. And so for the first 4 sessions, I guess, mom brought her. And mom wasn't in my office, but I touched base with her and then took the kiddo back. And as the child and I talked, she was very, very critical of her father and just didn't like anything that he did. And I was beginning to form, an opinion based on that. And then her dad came back into town and he brought her to the next session, and he stayed in the waiting room just like mom had. And the child came back to my office and was as negative about the mother as she had been about the father previously.
Interesting.
And it really is, because kids are people pleasers, they're entirely dependent on the adult for their survival. They love the adult and they want them to be happy. And so they are kind of geared to do whatever brings that about. And unfortunately, in divorce situations, that frequently means that the child will say completely different things to each parent, which then leads to terrible confusion because each parent believes they're doing what the child wants and what's best for the child, but it's really not.
Imagine what that must feel like for a child, trying to be in the middle, because kids so often see and hear, observe, and feel about things, but they don't know what to do with that information. They don't have any experience to handle it. They don't know where to file it in their brains, in their lives. So we try to be sure that that doesn't happen.
That's great. And I can't tell you the number of cases that I've had over my career where one parent comes and says, well, Joey says that he wants to live with me. So we file a lawsuit. Then we go through it, and there could be a custody evaluation or just a child interview. And then Joey says something completely different than what he told my clients.
The way I talk about this with adults is, you know how when you commit to doing something in the future, like you make plans with friends or something while you're out with those same people, and then the time comes for the next activity and you're thinking, oh, why did I make these plans? I don't really feel like doing this now.
Yes.
And it's because, when they're with one parent, they love how that feels and they are comfortable and happy there. And transitions in general are very difficult for adults and for kids.
Oh, boy.
And so any transition is hard and they resist that. And so it's pretty common for them to want different things when they're in different places and with different people. And that's okay. It's part of being a kid.
Yeah. So, what about this comes up often because the child's wishes are important in the court's determination, as long as the child is of sufficient maturity to express those wishes. So, do you have any thoughts as far as what you've seen in your practice? I know it varies from child to child, but at what point do you think a child is conscious about, hey, this is what I really want, and that they can make those decisions, or not that they are ever able to make the decisions, but they are of sufficient maturity to express those wishes and those be authentic wishes? I don't know if that made sense, but.
So there's a lot that goes into making that decision. The first thing I want to do is talk with the child and find out what kind of issues they're having with the parent that they want less time with, what the problems are over there, and then hopefully work with that parent as well to see if those are problems that we can solve before we spend, $10,000-$20,000 on a custody battle. Let's see if we can fix the problem. Because the research is so clear that kids do better long-term if they have relationships with both parents, right, to the extent that it's safe for them to do that physically and emotionally. Is there a way that we can make that happen without shifting custody? If not, at that point, then we not just have the child's thoughts and feelings and opinions, but we also have evidence that the parent that the child has the problem with is either unable or unwilling to follow the advice of the therapist about how to improve that relationship with the child.
Especially with early adolescence and adolescents, we have to be very alert and aware about what they mean when they say things. Remembering one case where the 14-year-old said that she didn't want to live with one parent because there was never any food in the house. Well, now, right away you think, oh my gosh, that he doesn't feed the kid, But if you know teenagers, you know what that means. Yeah. Most of the time there is plenty of food in the house. It's just not what the kid wants to fix. Right. Or has to fix, can't just pull out a bag of chips.
Yes.
So I think that's an important piece of knowing the age of the child and how they're speaking and responding, and always keeping in mind the different parenting styles in two households. If one parent is more lenient and lets a kid get away with murder, and the other parent has rules that they're expected to follow, well, guess which parent the kid may want to be with, typical.
Yeah, totally. In cases, I had a decision come down a couple months ago where, a judge made an observation about the parents' two styles. One parent, she said had a permissive style, and the other one was authoritarian. There was a teenage girl involved, and so one of the parents' authoritarian style was clashing with the teenage girl's teenagehood, and. And the judge observed this and said, listen, parent, you need to find a different way of communicating with the child if you want to improve this relationship. Do you have any observations about that or thoughts on that?
I wish that every parent had to take a course in how to communicate and how to parent. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. But even when ordered by the court, it doesn't always have impact. But if parents can learn that the way they interact and communicate with their children is the most important factor in the relationship. Parents forget that it's important to listen from the time they are little right on up. People forget that kids have opinions and they need to feel respected and loved. And if we can teach parents how to interact appropriately and effectively, then you don't have a lot of the discipline problems, the teenage acting out issues, because the kids feel valued and respected and they don't have that need to rebel.
To the extent that it's possible, it's better if the expectations and consequences are similar, at least from one house to the other. So this gets into co-parenting therapy, but that is a big piece of it, is helping the parents decide together what they feel like are realistic expectations to have of their child and what are reasonable consequences if those expectations aren't met. But if you can develop something like that together with the parents and then have the parents together share that with the child, then that usually is very successful. And if you can't do that, note of warning to the parents, your child will learn very quickly how to play the two of you against each other, particularly in situations where the parents don't talk much. I had a case once, a 15-year-old girl, her parents had just divorced, and before they divorced, they had decided that this friend of hers, we'll call her Nicole, was not a good person for the child to hang around with because she was boy crazy and was drinking and things like that. So the parents had agreed that their child would not be spending time with Nicole. And so the first appointment for co-parenting therapy, these people come into my office and the mom lights into the dad and is saying, I can't believe you let our child go to the mall with Nicole by herself. We talked about that. You completely went against our agreement. And the dad says, well, I figured after you let her spend the night at Nicole's house, something had changed and you thought it was okay now. And there was complete silence in my office. And I said, yeah, Mom, you didn't let her spend the night at Nicole's, did you? And she said, no. And the kid knew that her parents didn't talk. And so she absolutely lied to the one parent, knowing that he would never double check the story with the other parent. And so you just literally, for the safety of your child, you have to be able to talk to each other.
Oh my gosh, what a great example. And I think this is an excellent place to start talking about co-parenting therapy. But I just want to comment that I think in most situations that I've experienced where this has come up, this an example like you just described, that the tendency would be for one parent to disbelieve the other and say, you're lying, or whatever, and not think that it was the child who was doing the manipulation. So, okay. So, in this case that I was talking about where I got the decision a couple of months ago, the judge ordered co-parenting therapy for the parents. And can you just share what that means, what it is and what it looks like?
It's kind of couples therapy for people who actively dislike each other.
That's good.
A lot of times I'll meet with the kids in situations like that to get their perspectives of what's going on. But it basically is helping the co-parents figure out whatever needs to be figured out between the two of them so that they can move forward in a way that's not damaging for their child.
They have to be in agreement about the big picture. And sometimes that requires some negotiation. A technique that I find very helpful with that, whether it's a co-parenting for a divorce situation or just an intact family, is to have the parents sit down and maybe do it separately and then come together, or if they can do it together, talk about what they want their child to look like, be, how they want their child to behave, what kind of person do they want that child to be when they finish college, let's say, and then write all those things down and go backwards. So if that's how you want them to be when they finish college, then where do they have to be when they start college? And okay, then back that further. If they're going to be like this when they start college, what do we need to do with them and for them back, like in high school and middle school and elementary school, so that they have the kind of experiences that allow them to make those approaching steps to the ultimate person that, of course, will change eventually too, but at
Yes.
least that gives the parents a guideline that gives them a very clear, specific goal that they can work towards, and makes it much easier for them to come together on how we get to that goal, both, this year, next year, and the year after. Parents tend to realize when they go through that exercise is that they really both want the same thing for the child. And that makes a world of difference in their ability to negotiate and come together on the plans and the policies, the house rules, even.
Yes. I think that is an excellent exercise for people to go through, just to kind of reverse engineer, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So, I'm sure that somebody out there watching this video right now is going to say, well, my ex has a personality disorder,
He's
that
narcissistic, I'm sure.
Yes.
Always narcissistic.
Yes. Yes, exactly. He's narcissistic, or has borderline personality disorder, or is bipolar,
Bipolar.
or this is a high conflict situation, and it's not possible. How do you respond to that?
In my experience, you never know what's possible until you sit down in the same room together and try it. A lot of times in Tennessee, anyway, the way they do mediations is often with the mom and her attorney in one room and the dad and his attorney in another room, and the mediator runs back and forth.
Yes.
And I put everybody in together, and they hate it, but that's what works. And I actually had a set of co-parents tell me the other day, I really wish we had done this first before
Really?
we mediation. I wish we had come to co-parenting first, because they were able in 2 sessions to develop their entire parenting plan.
Oh my gosh.
And they really agreed on more things than they thought they did.
Mm-hmm.
In separate rooms, you don't necessarily find that out. I think you don't know what's possible until you try it. And there are absolutely some people that are really resistant. And for those people, if we're going to be perfectly honest, I just guilt trip them. I ask them to think about their child on their wedding day, getting ready to either walk down the aisle or watch their bride walk down the aisle. And then I ask them to think about their child sitting in the room waiting for that to start and being heartbroken because only one of their parents was able to attend. Because if both parents are in the same place, they can't behave. Then I will tell people very directly, you don't get to do that to your child.
Yeah.
You don't get to take one of you away from them. And sometimes that seems to hit home a little bit, because they really, I think, sometimes don't see how far reaching and really long term the impact of something like this can be.
Yeah.
Totally. Totally. I know, well, it can affect the child, right, in their future relationships, and creating this pattern.
And how they parent. And
Exactly. Well, just from what you were describing in terms of, well, I know that I was raised in an authoritarian type household. So I tend to lean that way, although my husband says I'm authoritative, of course, which I like. I'm glad that he
that's
thinks
the
that.
best.
I'm glad he thinks that, because he's permissive, but you've really, given me some stuff to think about in terms of, and we're together, we're married, but our relationship and my future relationship with my daughter, as far as discipline and how my style could affect our future relationship and how she feels going into future romantic relationships and raising her children, because I see now how my parents' style has impacted my own.
Yes.
That's a long way of, that's what I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so these conflict patterns that the kids see have the potential to repeat themselves, right?
Absolutely. And there are, and this may be a session for another day, but there is a very straightforward, easy kind of way to come up with a set of expectations and consequences that both parents agree on and that are geared toward making the child a productive adult, and that completely eliminate power struggles between parents and kids and nagging and all of that kind of stuff that all parents hate. And if you can sit down with people and help them come up with that together, I think it's a lot easier than people think, because if you have this continuum of permissive and authoritarian, I think sometimes, if we have a 1 and a 10, if people start out at 4 and 6 or 3 and 7, but then one of them shifts closer to the edge, the other parent feels like they need to shift in the other direction. So
to compensate.
Often, if you start out at 3 and 7, and then somebody shifts to 2, the other one may shift to 8. And then all of a sudden you've got 1 and 10.
Yeah.
And neither one of those is really rational or what the parent would choose if they weren't trying to balance out the other. So if you can get them to sit down together and come up with having a mental health professional saying, this is what's reasonable, this is what's good for your child. Mm-hmm. Can you guys agree on that? A lot of times that will go a long way.
Oh, that's great. I would love, we could talk later, but I would love to have a special, another show or session on that. That is so valuable because, as you know, I mean, there are handbooks or guides to becoming a parent, but nobody usually ever reads it before.
Right.
I didn't.
No.
And I'm trying to figure it out. And half the time I feel like I'm doing a really messed up job,
That's the thing they don't tell you about becoming a parent, is that you second guess every decision you make, like forever after that happens.
Yeah. So with co-parenting sessions, when you do them, do you have like a set number and you say, then you're done, you're free to go? Or does it depend on the progress that the parent makes? Or does the court make orders? What does that look like?
It depends entirely on how quickly the parents can move through it and come to a good, solid, workable program that they both buy into. Mm-hmm. And that may take 2 sessions. It may take 10 sessions. It just depends. It's not necessarily a stagnant program. It may need to be revised a little bit here or there. Mm-hmm. And we always want to assure the parents that we want to check back in with them so that they have an opportunity to bring questions or situations change, the child's with a different group of friends or there's a different neighbor, whatever, so that it's not signed, sealed, and delivered once and done. Again, it varies. It's just like individual therapy.
And there are definitely times within that where one parent is just absolutely unwilling to budge. And the advantage of doing the co-parenting therapy, even if you know that your ex is personality disordered and will be unwilling to budge, is that the court is much more likely to receive that information from a mental health professional than they are from an ex. If we try co-parenting therapy and the one parent is just not participating, then that's what goes in the report. When the mental health professional reports back to the judge, it will clearly say, this person was either unable or unwilling to make the changes. And that says a lot about who will be the better parent overall.
That's excellent. And I agree with that 100%. I mean, so many cases I have where there are allegations that somebody is personality disordered, but there's really, no evidence except what happened between the parties. And, I'm not saying it's not true, but we don't have anything else.
Well, and people can be terrible spouses and be good parents.
Ah, Great observation.
See that all the time.
That's a great observation. And I think, like I think about individuals who are in just horrible toxic relationships. Yeah, and I hear about, like, I have friends who are in bad relationships and I know each party and I'm like, well, gosh, they seem like they're fine. I don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's just that combination.
Well, gasoline by itself is great and fire by itself is great, but when you put them together, it is awful.
There you go.
And, that doesn't necessarily mean that either parent would interact with the child the way they interact with their other spouse, who clearly is a trigger of some sort for them.
Thank you. I mean, so this is like really providing some balance for me in terms of what I hear from potential clients and, another perspective to think about. And it's easy to get caught up in, this other person is just horrific and not think about, well, maybe they're not so bad. I appreciate that. Do you think that co-parenting is helpful to any person who is separating from an ex-partner, or do you think it's only helpful in certain situations?
I mean, I think it's kind of like therapy in general. Everybody can find some benefit from it. I think there are a lot of people that would not choose to do it if they weren't ordered to. But, it's definitely a good thing. And I love when families come in like that, when they say, we're getting ready to go through a divorce and we want to make sure we do it right for our kids. That's the best of all possible worlds.
I love that. And I wish more people would do that. And actually, you've given me something to think about in my practice in terms of maybe looking at that prior to trying to resolve the custody and decision making and parenting time issues, because maybe it will bring people together and make it easier to settle those areas.
It's always better to be proactive than reactive. It gives people a greater sense of control. And I hate the word because it's used so badly so much, but the power to parent well.
Yeah.
And the idea of co-parenting gives them that platform to establish something positive in the midst of all of the turmoil of the divorce. And that is so important for the stability of the child through that process, trying to keep things as calm and as steady, as routine as possible. And that's the kind of thing that can take place in co-parenting therapy before divorce and even in a non-contentious family relationship.
I appreciate that. I have another friend who's a psychotherapist in New York City, and she wrote a book called Befriending Your Ex After Divorce. And what she told me once was, it's not the divorce that screws the kids up, it's the conflict between the parents.
Yes. Yeah. Well, because, children are egocentric just because that's how God made them, right? And so lacking another explanation for what's happening, they will assume that it's because of something they did.
Their fault.
And the other thing that I think people don't realize is that kids don't see a lot of the background kind of falling apart of the relationship. And so from their perspective, mom and dad are married one day and the next day they hate each other and can't live together or talk to each other. And children don't understand that the love parents have for kids is different than the love parents have for each other. And so I have had several children over the years verbalize to me that they wonder when mom or dad will stop loving them the way they stopped loving the other parent, because they don't get that it doesn't happen that way. They just see that the love disappeared, and that becomes part of what they fear.
On the other extreme of that continuum, I have had parents considering planning a divorce who say, oh no, the kids have no idea because, we've always hidden our arguments from them. They just don't have any clue. Next time talking to the kid, the child says, I'm really glad they're getting divorced because they have hated each other and been mean for years.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. So you just kind of never know, I guess. Sometimes it just depends.
And that's why it's so important that you have a compassionate, understanding person who can talk with all parties and try to really get the lowdown on what has happened and what is happening. And then hopefully give each person insight that can allow them to either change their behavior or cope with behavior from themselves or other people.
You guys are performing like an amazing service to people in the world. We're coming up on the hour. So I think hopefully you'll be willing to schedule another time with me to talk. Like, I'd love to talk about reunification counseling or therapy. Also, this system that you have for developing, boundaries and things for children. I would love to talk with you more about that. So I appreciate your knowledge, and I'm wondering, so right now we're in the age of COVID as we record this. Obviously, I'm sure you just work with people in your area for the supervised visits and the therapeutic supervision. What about, the services that you provide when it comes to co-parenting sessions? Are those you still just doing local, or do you work with people in different parts of the country? Can you share more how you can help people?
Well, luckily, COVID has forced those of us who are technologically challenged to learn how to use virtual communication so that we are able to work with people in different parts of the country, because so much of it is, almost all of it, in fact, is online. And it is not as, I don't enjoy it as much, but it can be as effective.
Awesome.
It's interesting talking about kids and boundaries. One of my favorite analogies is that if you have a bridge across a river and it's just a flat bridge, maybe a yard wide, and that's it, it's just flat. There are no handrails, and you try to walk across that bridge, you're not going to feel real comfortable. You're not
Yep.
going to feel safe.
No.
You're not going to feel free to look over and see the beauty below. But if that same bridge has handrails, banisters that you can hold on to, that are there, that are going to keep you safe, then you're free to walk, skip, run across that bridge. And you're also free to lean over and enjoy the beauty that is around and below. Children are like that. I think in a way we all are. We need boundaries. We need to know what is okay, what is not okay. Whether you're a parent and it's in your parenting, whether you're a young child and it's drawing on the wall with crayons, an adolescent doing drugs, they need those limits, because that's what makes us feel safe. And the people who enforce those limits allow us to feel loved and cared for.
That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, Nell and Dr. Shannon. And can you just please tell people how they can find you, your website address, and just how they can reach you if they want to reach out, please?
Absolutely. So our company is the Assurance Group. Our website is theassurancegroup.org. And once you're in the website, there is a form to contact either Pennsylvania, which is Nell, or Tennessee, which is me. So you can do that. And we are in the process of setting up some kind of educational teleseminars sort of things that people can participate in. So if anybody's interested in getting on an email list for those, we'll be covering things like parenting and divorce and just regular run-of-the-mill mental health stuff like anxiety and depression, because those are more prevalent now than ever before. So you can let us know if you'd like more information about those as well.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much. And for anybody out there who's watching and you have more questions or you want more resources, feel free to reach out to Nell and Dr. Wilson. Thank you so much for taking the time on the show, and I'm glad it worked out.
Thank you for having us.
You're
We're
welcome.
delighted.
You're welcome. And I hope that you guys will come back. I hope we can find a time that works for all of us to come on.
Absolutely. We'd love to.
Thank you. You guys be safe. And for anybody out there watching, just remember to keep on trucking and get out there and command the courtroom. And I'll see you next time.